We want to continue our study on creation versus evolution. And I want to pick up, we'll go back, backtrack just a little bit, just a slide or two, to kind of get the context of what we're looking at with you today as we continue this study with you. I hope this is a study that will, if all my stuff doesn't fall out, a study that will be beneficial to you. I know it will be to me. I've always heard people say that teachers learn more than their students. I think that is true. So this is something that is helping me. I hope you'll get some benefit out of this study in the coming weeks. The last thing we were looking at, we had read Genesis 1 to see what does the Bible say about how God did it, because that's really what's important in this discussion. How did God say that God did it? And that's what I believe. I know that that's what you believe. So we went through and looked at Genesis 1 and what it said and what God did in each of the 6 days, and then he rested the seventh day. And I told you there's people that consider themselves to be Bible believers but want to hold on to evolution. There's two popular theories that they try to use. One is the gap theory, that between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, there's a gap of millions, maybe billions of years between that. And so that's one method they try to use to they feel like they have to match the time that evolutionists say with what the Bible account says. The other theory is the day-age theory, that each of those days really was, again, millions of years and this sort of thing. That is not, when you read the text, doesn't jump out at you. You would have to think that up yourself to believe that. And the only reason people believe that is because of the influence of the evolutionist scientists. So we got to find a way. All right, I want to hold on the Bible, but these scientists are so smart, they must be right. So how can we tie those things together? And as we want to look at in this study with you over the next few weeks is that we don't have to, there's not any reason why we have to accept those dates of the scientists. There are many, many ways of dating things that you get a much earlier date than some of these dates that they try to propose. And like I said, we'll talk more about that in coming days. We mentioned that Jesus in Matthew 19, verses 4 through 5, in the discussion of marriage, talked about Adam and Eve, the first married couple, and said they were created at the beginning. Again, if there were millions and billions of years, that would make absolutely no sense for Christ to say that. Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning God created the world. If there were millions of years that went on and then Adam and Eve came on the scene, that's not the beginning. That's not what's being talked about there. And then we talked about the shedding of the blood of Abel by Cain. And again, notice, again, we don't know exactly, the Bible doesn't tell us the exact time frame. We know that it's less than 130 years after creation. But even if we're 129 years after creation, that's near the foundation of the world. And so the blood of Abel was shed at or near the foundation of the world. And certainly 129 or less years would certainly fit into that category. Millions and billions of years would not. So Christ looks at these accounts we read in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 as being at the beginning, near the foundation of the world, as it said here. And the clear reading, when you read Exodus 20 and Exodus 31, is that God created the world in 6 days. And again, and in that same context, talks about the Sabbath being the seventh day. Well, we understand the Sabbath to be a 24-hour period of time. Those 6 days that God created the world were 24-hour periods of time. And I'm not going to reread this to you. I think we looked at this with you last time. I found this online and thought that was really good. The word yom in the Hebrew, and again, I'm not a Hebrew expert, but I can read what people have said about the Hebrew. The Hebrew word yom is what is used here in this context. And as this pointed out, it's used 2,282 times outside of Genesis 1. 359 times the word yom is used with a number. Every single time is clearly talking about a 24-hour period of time. So the context tells you, the context of Genesis 1 is clearly what God is trying to indicate is 24-hour periods of time that's being talked about here. So as we talked about, there's many religious people that want to compromise on this issue. All right, how can we tie the Bible together with evolution? Again, these evolutionists must be so smart. They must be right about the millions of years. How can we tie it together? And so sometimes I've heard people say this, y'all probably have too. They say, well, God can do anything, couldn't God have used evolution to create the world? Couldn't he have done this over a period of millions and billions of years? Absolutely. Sure, he could have. He could have done it any way he wanted to. He could have done it in 1 second if he had wanted to. So he could have. But my question is, if that's the case, why couldn't God? So they'll say, well, you're questioning God, and say, well, that God couldn't have done it that way. Why couldn't God have done it exactly like he said he did it? That's my question to them. So sure, he could have created it when he wanted to, but why could he not have created it exactly like he said he did? 10 times in Genesis 1, the scriptures state that all living things are made after its kind. 10 times by my count. That's what I counted the other day. If y'all count different, let me know. 10 times the phrase after its kind is used in reference to the plants, to the animals, to mankind. Created after its kind. That's not what evolution teaches. It is as if God was anticipating the theory of evolution and wanted to emphasize that things made didn't change from one type of animal to another. You and I were made in the image of God, not in the image of animals. So God specifically says things are made after its kind, not evolving from one kind to another. That's not the case. And I used this example, I think, with you last time. It's like if you bought a packet of watermelon seeds and you planted it and tomatoes came up. Your first thought wouldn't be, watermelons are evolved into tomatoes. You think somebody put the wrong seed in this packet. And it's been like that since time began. You plant watermelon seeds, you get watermelon seeds, and that's the way it's going to be from now on. You plant tomato seeds, you get tomato seeds. It does not turn into something else. We understand you can get different varieties of tomatoes or different varieties of watermelon. That's not evolution. That's mutations or adaptations or whatever you want to call that. It's not turning into a completely different type of thing. That does not happen. So my point that I want to emphasize throughout the study is, I know y'all feel the same way, we do not want to compromise on this issue. I think it's important not to give ground on this issue. God spoke the world into existence and created everything in it during 6 literal 24-hour days, approximately 6,000 years ago. You can trust what God has told you. People ridicule you and I and call us dumb. If you stand up in a scientific convention and say, the world is 6,000 years old, created in 6 days by God, they'll laugh you out of the room. And they'll call you ridiculous and call you dumb. And that's what they try to do, is to try to bully you. But again, if you look at their theory, it's not too bright. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It's not logical at all. But they want to always put the shoe on the other foot, and they're good at doing that, and try to make you look dumb. And we talked about in the Scopes trial, that's basically was what the defense tried to do. Darrow tried to make Brian look dumb. He didn't have any proof of what he believed, but try to ridicule people, and that's what they'll try to do to you and I. Y'all are dumb, y'all are backwards, you whatever. Well, they can say that all they want to. I think their theory is dumb, and maybe I shouldn't do name calling, but I think that's part of the problem too in this argument. Is we try to fight so kind and nice and polite. They don't. I think sometimes we need to fight with a little more grit on this topic and not give in on things like that. So don't back down from the evolutionistic bullies. Their theory is unbelievably ignorant and foolish, and evolution is an out-and-out lie. Now, before we get into some other things, I want to share this with y'all, a few quotes this morning. We'll get as many of these as we can. I ran across this. I went to a meeting that someone from Apologetics Press held a few years ago in Mobile, probably been about 20 years ago now. And he did several presentations over a few days. But this particular one, I never had been in one like this, didn't use one scripture and didn't tell us till the end. He used a bunch of quotes for what people said about evolution. And at the end, he said, all these quotes were about evolutionists, about their own theory. And my point to that is sometimes people say, well, these people are so smart, they must be right. They must have a lot of evidence. The people that know the theory of evolution the best probably doubt it the most. And that was new to me. I never had really thought about it that way. The people that are experts in the field realize the shortcomings of it a lot more than everybody else does. And some of us need to understand, not every scientist is an expert in this field. They've been expert in one type of field. The ones that are experts in this field realize all the problems with it. So that's what I tell you a minute ago. Yes, sir.
Scientists have been pretty much discredited by all the things positions they've taken on COVID,
Yes.
its origins, and everything else. Just a bunch of people trying to push a political
That's exactly right.
not really taking the
Yes.
facts into consideration. So the same thing on evolution.
Yes, sir.
They're developing their own theory with no basis.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Some political objective to try to.
Yep. Same thing with global warming, climate change,
Yeah.
those same types of things.
All that scientists
Yep.
say, well, scientists is not correct.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Amen, brother.
Brother Keith,
Yes, sir.
the way I see it, from the beginning, God would have to have been, he would have had to have flip-flopped on just about everything that was written then in all of the reasoning of God.
Yes.
Right after that creation and become something altogether different. And I have never read that God changes,
That's exactly right.
that he stays the same. And I really feel for these people because they have just literally stuck their head in the ground and stuck their fingers in their ears and started la 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 la
Yeah.
because they just don't want to face the fact that it's just a bunch of trash.
Yes.
And I don't say that out of meanness.
I agree.
You know, I just
It's a fact.
So sad.
It is sad. That's a great word for it. They've been deceived. Many of them have been deceived by, I guess, from a young age, like so many have been. Taught from a young age that this happened, and so they accept it by faith.
Well, what we've always heard is how can that many brilliant people be that wrong? Well, when it comes right down to it, when it comes to blurring the difference between right, wrong, good, and evil, they have always been wrong.
Yeah.
And you would think that after a while, if you keep trying to run through that brick wall, especially if you don't have a football helmet, it's not going to work out well.
Yeah.
And it's like I say, it's just sad.
Well, it really is, and I'm going to talk about this more later on, but I'll mention this while you bring that up. I was listening to a video the other day, and this will be later on in our presentation, but about dinosaur footprints that have been found in Glen Rose, Texas. And I've never been there. I'd like to go there, Dinosaur Valley State Park or something like that. But dinosaur footprints, but in those same layer, there's also human footprints there as well. And there was a guy from some national television station, or I don't know if it's National Geographic or whatever, that came to investigate. And so there were some creationist scientists out there too. And so here's this big scientist with this camera, and so he's reporting on this and say, I see no human footprints out here. And the creationist scientists were off camera saying, how about this? He would even turn around and look at the human footprints. I mean, that's how blind they are and how they refuse to look at any evidence that will contradict their theory. People talk about us being zealous and passionate about what we believe and being faith-based, and I admit that. So are they. So are they. The things they believe is by faith.
That also goes against what God would have us to do, is to use our reasonable common sense and place this together. I mean, have you ever seen George Washington?
I have not.
But do you believe he actually lived? All right, let's give it over to Brother Bill then. He can speak on that.
He's a close friend of mine.
But it's just, don't mean to be mean. I've got some loved ones that are of that same belief, but it really, to me, kind of comes across kind of like the Catholic Church, that there is so much corruption from the very beginning that I can't see how anything good or positive that has ever come out of the Catholic Church. I know that they try to do good things and try to reach out and help, but I get the same exact feeling about this nonsense and the way that the Catholic Church is run and their beliefs.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and sort of say that about evolution. I think evolution hinders true science.
right.
It's like science is supposed to be based on observation, what you can taste. They won't observe, they won't test these things. And it's that. Dad, you had a point?
Well, the gap theory, or I guess the day theory that you talked about, there's so much about the Bible that you've almost got to try to misunderstand it to misunderstand it. And after each one of those first 6 days, it says, and the evening and the morning were the first day, evening, morning, the second day, evening, morning, the third day. So that eons of time, or the millions of years then, that means that the morning lasted millions of years.
Yep.
The evening lasted millions of years in order to fit in with what they want to say, because there were two parts to the day.
Yep.
There was light and darkness. There were two parts to the day. Even like you said the other day, before the sun, the moon, and the stars were created, there was a division of the day. So you almost got to try to reach something into it, or just try to misunderstand it, to reach something into the fact that that day was millions of years, because there were two parts to the day.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if they
Yeah.
take that into account or not, but each part had millions of years in.
The obvious
These are really-
context.
And if each one had two parts, and if each one had millions of years, how many millions of years did he rest before?
Right.
You know, must have rested a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess if you did all that in 6 days, you'll rest
Yes,
millions of years too.
That's exactly right.
before anything comes up.
Yep.
It's pitiful, the thinking on that.
It really is. It really is. So what I want to do is to share with you a few quotes from people that are evolutionists. That these are not Bible-believing Christians. These are evolutionists in the scientific fields, of experts in some of these scientific fields. I want to share with you some quotes about their own theory. And again, I found this extremely interesting. This was enlightening to me, how some of them really see this many problems. So anyway, just bear with me as I read through some of this. Pierre-Paul Grasse, a zoologist. So he says this, again, not a Christian. I don't know if he's ever read a Bible. Here's what he says. Today, our duty is to destroy the myth of evolution as a simple, understood, and explained phenomenon which keeps rapidly unfolding before us. So here's a guy that is an evolutionist, but says the idea of evolution being this simple thing is a myth. It is not. Biologists must be encouraged to think about the weaknesses and extrapolations that theoreticians put forward to lay down as established truths. The deceit is sometimes unconscious. He's talking about his own people. So that they may not be meaning to deceive people about the thinking of evolution being this simple process, but they are. The deceit is sometimes unconscious, but not always, since some people, owing to their sectarianism, he's talking about his own people, purposely overlook reality and refuse to acknowledge the inadequacies and falsities of their beliefs. There's success among certain biologists, he's talking about evolutionists that convince other scientists of these things, among certain biologists, philosophers, and sociologists, notwithstanding the explanatory doctrines of biological evolution do not stand up to an objective, in-depth criticism. They prove to be either in conflict with reality or else incapable of solving the major problems involved. Basically, what this guy is saying is evolution doesn't stand up to scientific scrutiny. Here's a guy that's, again, not a Bible believer. This is a scientist that's, as far as I know, doesn't believe in God, says this really doesn't make sense. An amazing statement. Here's a guy named H.S. Lipson, a British physicist and evolutionist. He says, in fact, evolution became, in a sense, a scientific religion. That is interesting. He admits that, because that's exactly right. They don't want to admit that, but it is a religion. It's a faith-based religion that they have. Almost all scientists have accepted it, and many are prepared to bend their observations to fit with it. That's an interesting statement there. Again, this is not a Christian, but he's saying scientists are bending what they're observing to fit with the theory. I've always been slightly suspicious of the theory of evolution because of its ability to account for any property of living beings. I've therefore tried to see whether biological discoveries over the last 30 years or so fit in with Darwin's theory. What he's saying is, I've done science. I've looked at what I've observed and can study and measure and compared it to this theory. I've tried to match my observations with the theory of evolution. Notice what he says. I do not think they do. What he's saying is, my observations do not fit with this evolutionary story that we're telling people. To my mind, the theory does not stand up at all. If living matter is not then caused by an interplay of atoms, natural forces, and radiation, how has it come into being? I think, however, that we must go further than this and admit that the only acceptable explanation is creation. There's not a Christian that's saying this. Creation is the only thing that makes sense to this theory. Notice what he says. I know that this is anathema to physicists. I mean, it pains me to say this, as indeed it is to me. But we must not reject a theory we do not like if the experimental evidence supports it. Here's a guy that's not a Christian that says creation fits better with the facts than evolution does.
I would hope that maybe he would actually follow the reasoning and explore much more diligent the scriptures.
I have thought the same thing as some of these quotes. I wish some of these, I hope they do find the Lord. It looks like some of them are looking for the Lord. Yes, I agree, brother. Great point. Colin Patterson, a paleontologist. I think always before in my life, when I've gotten up to speak on a subject, I've been confident of one thing, that I know more about it than anybody in the room because I've worked on it. Here's a pretty confident fellow. Well, this time it isn't true. I'm speaking on two subjects, evolutionism and creationism, and I believe it's true to say that I know nothing whatever about either of them. One of the reasons I started taking this anti-evolutionary view, or let's call it a non-evolutionary view, was that last year I had a sudden realization. For over 20 years, I thought I was working on evolution some way. So here's a guy that's been an avid evolutionist for 20 years. He says, one morning I woke up and something happened in the night, and it struck me that I'd been working on this stuff for 20 years, and there was no one thing I knew about it. It's quite a shock to learn that one could be misled for so long. Either there was something wrong with me, or there was something wrong with the evolutionary theory. Naturally, I know there's nothing wrong with me, he says. So for the last few weeks, I've tried putting a simple question to various people in groups. Question is, can you tell me anything you know about evolution, any one thing that is true? That's an amazing statement. Here's a guy that's worked on for 20 years and said, you know what, I don't know anything about this. Amazing. Fred Hoyle, this one caught my eye because, and Fred Hoyle has passed on a few years ago, but he was the one that came up with the term Big Bang. So he named the theory that people call he named it. So the English scientist that did that. Now, in fairness, some things I read is he was some of that was kind of sarcastic in what he apparently intended. But somebody that believed in evolution. So here's an evolutionist, the guy that named the Big Bang Theory. Here's what he said. I don't know how long it is going to be before astronomers generally recognize that the combinatorial arrangement of not even one among the many thousands of biopolymers on which life depends could have been arrived at by natural processes here on the Earth. Astronomers will have a little difficulty in understanding this because they will be assured in their turn by others that it's not so. So again, these other scientists are convinced, comforted by others that, yeah, it makes sense. The others are a group of persons who believe quite openly in mathematical miracles. He's talking about evolutionists. They believe in mathematical miracles. They advocate the belief that tucked away in nature, outside of normal physics, there is a law which performs miracles, provided the miracles are an aid of biology. That's an interesting statement. So he's saying evolutionists believe in miracles as long as it's in their favor. The curious situation sits oddly on a profession that for so long has been dedicated to coming up with logical explanations of biblical miracles. It is quite otherwise, however, with the modern miracle workers who are always to be found living in the twilight fringes of thermodynamics. At all events, anyone with even a nodding acquaintance with the Rubik's Cube will concede the near impossibility of a solution being obtained by a blind person moving the cubic faces at random. I'm sure y'all familiar with that. That was a big thing in the early 80s. I think I got one when I was in 5th or 6th grade, and I cheated. I bought the book and memorized the solution, so I couldn't figure it out myself. But it's very difficult to get this thing just by chance. I think Lucas is really good with that thing. But it's
30 seconds.
he's a lot smarter than I am. So this thing is really amazing. You have to really try to do this. We're saying, can you imagine, picture a blind person doing that? Almost impossible, we'd all agree, I think, for a blind person to put the Rubik's Cube together just by chance. Notice the mathematical statement he makes. Now imagine 10 to the 50th power blind persons. That's a big number. That's a 1 with 50 zeros behind it. More than millions, billions, trillions, quadrillions, decillions, everything. Imagine 10 to the 50th power blind persons, each with a scrambled Rubik Cube, and try to conceive of the chance of them all not just solving it, but solving it simultaneously. Can't happen. I mean, one blind person couldn't do it. You imagine 10 to the 50 of the blind persons coming to the solution for the Rubik's Cube by chance at the same time. He's saying that's the odds of evolution having happened. It says you then have the chance of arriving by random shuffling at just one of the many biopolymers on which life depends. The notion that not only biopolymers, but the operating program of a living cell can be arrived at by chance in a primordial organic soup here on the earth is evidently, notice what it says, nonsense of a high order. He says what we've been teaching is nonsense. It could not have happened by chance. That's an incredible statement. Again, by a guy that, this is not a Bible-believing person, or at least he wasn't. The chance that higher life forms have emerged in this way is comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 through the materials therein. We all know that's not going to happen. Once we see, however, that the probability of life originating at random is so utterly minuscule as to make the random concept absurd, it becomes sensible to think that the favorable properties of physics on which life depends are in every respect deliberate. It had to be a creator is what he's saying. It is therefore almost inevitable that our own measure of intelligence must reflect in a valid way the higher intelligences, even to the extreme idealized limit of God. Notice what he says. I am now actively searching for the guiding hand of the Creator. And again, he's passed on. I hope he found him. I don't know if he did or not. But again, isn't that remarkable? Here's an avid evolutionist saying this theory makes no sense. The guy that named the Big Bang Theory.
First thing you got to accept that there was something here.
Yes.
Where did that come from? You can keep going in reverse.
That's exactly right.
There had to be something.
That's exactly right.
Where did something come from?
Yep.
So that's one of the big issues I have.
Yes.
If you say, well, if you explain that, there's only one way to explain that, and that's creation.
That's exactly right.
Because we accept that something does not come from nothing.
Yes, sir.
That's, I think, was the first law of
Yes. Yes, sir.
matter cannot be created.
That's
or
right.
destroyed, and
That's right.
so it had to be here.
That's a great point. Amen. Amen. A guy named Michael Denton said this. Again, not a Christian as far as I know. The anti-evolutionary thesis argued in this book, the idea that life might be fundamentally a discontinuous phenomenon runs counter to the whole thrust of biological thought. Then again, evolution doesn't add up with what we see. Put simply, no one has ever observed the interconnecting continuum of functional forms linking all known past and present species of life. The concept of the continuity of nature has existed in the mind of man, never in the facts of nature. That's an amazing statement. Again, this is a guy that's a scientist, not a Bible-believing scientist. This says the theory of evolution is in the mind of man. The facts don't show that to you when you study the facts. Amazing statement. Robert Jastrow, an American astronomer and planetary physicist, said this. This is a great statement that he makes here. The universe is the totality of all matter, animate and inanimate, living and non-living, throughout space and time. If there was a beginning, what came before? Again, kind of what Brother Wayne was saying a minute ago. If there is an end, what will come after? On both scientific and philosophical grounds, the concept of an eternal universe seems more acceptable than the concept of a transient universe that springs into being suddenly and then fades slowly into darkness. Astronomers try not to be influenced by philosophical considerations. However, the idea of a universe that has both a beginning and an end is distasteful to the scientific mind. They want to believe that it's always been here. In a desperate effort to avoid it, some astronomers have searched for another interpretation for the measurements that indicate the retreating motion of the galaxies, an interpretation that would not require the universe to expand. Whereas what he's saying is, if they could prove the universe wasn't expanding, then they could argue, well, the universe has just always been here. But the fact is, it is an expanding universe, which means there had to have been a beginning. Let's see, where was it? If the evidence for an expanding universe could be explained away, the need for a moment of creation would be eliminated, and the concept of time without end would return to science. But these attempts have not succeeded, and most astronomers have come to the conclusion that they live in an exploding world, an expanding universe. And concurrently, there was a great deal of discussion about the fact that the second law of thermodynamics, applied to the cosmos, indicates the universe is running down like a clock. If it is running down, there must have been a time when it was fully wound up. Arthur Eddington, the most distinguished British astronomer of his day, wrote, "If our views are right, somewhere between the beginning of time and the present day, we must place the winding up of the universe. When that occurred, and who or what wound up the universe, were questions that bemused theologians, physicists, and astronomers, particularly in the 1920s and 30s. And as we talk about 1925, the Scopes trial became a big deal at that time. Here's, I think, this last slide on him. Most remarkable of all is the fact that in science, as in the Bible, the world begins with an act of creation. Not Big Bang or whatever, but it begins with an act of creation. That view has not always been held by scientists. Only as a result of the most recent discoveries can we say with a fair degree of confidence that the world has not existed forever, that it began abruptly, without apparent cause, and a blinding event that defies scientific description. The lingering decline predicted by astronomers for the end of the world differs from the explosive conditions they have calculated for its birth, but the impact is the same. Modern science denies an eternal existence to the universe, either the past or the future, whereas it had to have had a beginning. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. For the scientist who has lived by his faith and the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. What I'm saying is, we are starting to reach the conclusion that Bible believers have been saying for years, that there was a beginning, that there had to be a creator. And again, this is coming from a guy that's not a Bible believer as far as I know. But he's saying these facts that we're finding fit a whole lot better with the Bible account of creation than what evolution does. That's a remarkable statement to me. Here's a guy named Theodore Thomasian, a nuclear physicist with the Atomic Energy Commission. He said this: "Scientists who go about teaching that evolution is a fact of life are great con men, and the story they are telling may be the greatest hoax ever. In explaining evolution, we do not have one iota of fact. It is a tangled mishmash of guessing games and figure jangling. If evolution occurred at all, it was probably in a very different manner than the way it is now taught." This guy that was a scientist in the Atomic Energy Commission said, this does not make sense. Amazing statement. Dr. Don N. Page: "There is no mechanism known as yet that would allow the universe to begin in an arbitrary state and then evolve to its present highly ordered state." And again, part of this, it kind of makes me mad. I'm kind of sad, as Brother Scott said earlier, it makes me mad that these experts in the field say, we really don't have any proof for this. And what do they try to teach our kids in school, in our universities? They try to teach it as a fact. The people that know the theory the best say it really doesn't add up. It's a shame our kids in public schools and public universities aren't taught that. That we really don't have any proof. This is what we believe, but we really have zero proof what we're telling you. Amazing. John Eddy, an evolutionary scientist, I thought this was amazing right here. And again, this guy's not a Christian. He's an evolutionist. "I suspect that the sun is 4.5 billion years old." Okay, so he believes that's when our solar system started. The Big Bang occurred 14 billion, they say, and our solar system began 4.5 billion years ago. So this is my belief. However, given some new and unexpected results to the contrary, and some time for some frantic recalculation and theoretical readjustment, I suspect that we could live with Bishop Ussher's value for the age of the earth and sun. I don't think we have much in the way of observational evidence in astronomy to conflict with that. Now, notice what he's saying here. He says, I believe, he says, that the solar system is 4.5 billion years old. Bishop Ussher, we're familiar with his work. He's the one that dated creation to be about 6,000 years ago. He's saying there's really nothing in science that would contradict the 6,000-year thing that the Bible teaches. That's amazing. Now, he doesn't believe that himself, but he says, really can't argue. There's nothing scientifically that would prove that's the wrong date. That's amazing to me. That's amazing to me. So with all that in mind, with some of these evidences, I'm sure there's a lot more quotes we could find, but I would share those few with you from guys that are experts in the field that doubt their own theory. So with that said, why do so many people hold on to this antiquated notion that life evolved from nothing? As Brother Wayne said, and I agree with him. I think that's one of the biggest problems. You had to have something. It couldn't have come from nothing. There had to be something. Even if you say it came from this little cosmic egg, where did that come from? Somebody. So there's so many problems with that. In an article entitled Confessions of a Professed Atheist, a guy named Aldous Huxley stated, and he's an evolutionist, but he was candidly honest in why he believed in evolution. I had motives for not wanting the world to have meaning. Words, I don't want there to be meaning in the world. I don't want there to be a God. Consequently, assumed it had none, and was able without any difficulty to find reasons for this assumption. So it says, I had reasons why I didn't want there to be any God. The philosopher who finds no meaning in the world is not concerned exclusively with the problem in pure metaphysics. He is also concerned to prove there is no valid reason why he personally should not do as he wants to do. That's the key. That's the key to why this theory started is people want to do what they want to do. I don't want there to be any God telling me you can't do this or that. For myself, as no doubt for most of my contemporaries, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation. What type of liberation? The liberation we desired was simultaneously liberation from a certain political and economic system and liberation from a certain system of morality. We want to do what we want to do, and we objected to morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom. We wanted to live any way we wanted to be sexually wild, promiscuous. We didn't want any God telling us that we couldn't do this, that, or the other. But Scott, you had a point.
It just kind of hit me where these people would have to, like at least a couple of the folks that you just told us about, were 20 years of their life was spent doing this. I'm not real sure exactly if anybody's going to understand what I'm saying, but isn't it amazing that the Apostle Paul lived his whole life thinking he was doing right? And that is an amazing thing that he put it aside and said, you know what? I was wrong. But he did something about it.
Yeah.
He didn't just kind of, it's like, okay, I kind of see their point, but I'm still sticking with this. I just think that's another way of looking at what Paul had done throughout his life and how he had really spent the latter years of his life correcting all of what he had misunderstood.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And it's just so sad that these people are just unwilling to throw those 20 years away.
Yep.
And the thing is that how many times did the maker of the light bulb,
Thomas Edison.
How many times he proved that it didn't work this way?
Yeah.
But how would you have to be able to make it go the right way?
Yeah.
I guess right this second, I'm just amazed what Paul was able to bring himself to realize and what these people fail to do.
I think, that's a great point, brother. I think one of the hardest things in life to do is to admit when we're wrong. Yeah. Even in our daily lives, I take a wrong course, even with me as a teacher, maybe I made a mistake with a kid or with a player or whatever. Sometimes I might want to double down, not to admit that it's difficult sometimes to admit we're wrong. That's true. And it takes a big person. And Paul was willing to do that and change course, like you said. And that's what we should do. We mess up. Sometimes it's hard to do. Great point. Great point. The preface to the Humanist Manifesto 2 states, as in 1933, humanists still believe that traditional theism, especially faith in the prayer-hearing God, assumed to love and care for persons, is an unproved and outmoded faith. The document continues by saying, we find insufficient evidence for belief in the existence of a supernatural. Ethics, again, how we live, is autonomous, individual, and situational, needing no theological or ideological sanction. The many varieties of sexual exploration should not in themselves be considered evil. Again, that's one of the motivations. So I can live any way I want to. There's not any scientific proof for what I believe, but this is what I want to believe because I want to do what I want to do. Is there any question why these individuals are holding on to this theory? Were Huxley and his cohorts to abandon belief in evolution and accept the existence of God and the truthfulness of creation, it would have interfered with their sexual freedom. With that realization, they freely chose instead to abandon belief in God. That left them with only one option, belief in evolution. It's not because of the scientific proof, because that's how they wanted to live. It was not something that they accepted because of the weight of the evidence, rather it was something they accepted because they wished to avoid any personal accountability to their Creator. The actions belied their motives. As Guy N. Woods has remarked, convince a man that he came from a monkey and he'll act like one. And I say amen to that. Evolution is the weak attempt to remove God from the picture so that mankind can live out any definition of morality that they see fit. However, claiming that God doesn't exist does not make it so. And I've used this, I heard Brother Joel say this a number of times. I love that illustration, I love when he tells that story. I agree with the person who was told that God is dead. And to that statement, he replied, I didn't even know he was sick. God is alive and well, whether people choose to be ignorant of that fact or not. And again, I love that. Who did he say that was? Was it
The guy who lives
Gus Nichols, one of those? Kind of nudged him and he said, I didn't know. Yeah, I love that quote. Here's a quote from Sir Arthur Keith of Great Britain, who wrote, evolution is unproved and unprovable. We believe it because the only alternative is special creation, and that is unthinkable. So there's no reason, and again, that's an amazing statement, an admittance. We have no proof of evolution, but that's what we choose to believe. We don't want to believe in God. Professor D.M.S. Watson, who held the position of the chair of evolution at the University of London for more than 20 years, echoed the same sentiments when he stated that evolution itself is accepted by zoologists not because it has been observed to occur or can be proven by logical coherent evidence to be true, but because the only alternative, special creation, is incredible. We just refuse to believe that there's a God. So here's our only alternative. There's no evidence for it, but that's what we choose to believe. These kind of statements leave little to the imagination and make it clear that those who say such things believe in evolution not because of any evidence, but instead because they've made up their minds that they are not going to believe in God. And that's the bottom line. And one more along this line I want to share with you. Maybe the bell won't catch us here. Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell was a contemporary of Darwin, and actually he wrote a book in about 1830 on the geology of rocks, predating Darwin's book by almost 30 years. And a lot of Darwin's thinking was shaped by Lyell. So again, Darwin gave it a mechanism, natural selection. But here's some things that Lyell wrote in a private correspondence in 1829, just a few months before he published his famous thing. He wrote a letter to a guy named Roderick Murchison, and he says, I trust I shall make my sketch of the progress of geology popular. Again, he was about to publish his book. Old preacher Fleming is frightened and thinks the age will not stand my anti-mosaical conclusions, and at least the subject will for a time become unpopular and awkward for the clergy, but I'm not afraid. I shall outwit the whole, but in as conciliatory a manner as possible. So his motive was to destroy Bible teaching, destroy what Moses said in the book of Genesis. So that was part of his motivation. Just share a couple things real quick with you right here. Here's another one that he wrote. I'm sure that you will get into quarterly review. What will free the science from Moses, or treated seriously, the church party are quite prepared for it. They see at last the mischief and scandal brought on to them by Mosaic systems. So saying, my book is going to free people from Moses. He says, if we don't irritate, we shall carry all with us. If you don't triumph over them, but compliment them, the bishops and enlightened saints will join us in despising both the ancient and modern physico-theologians. It is just the time to strike. So rejoice that sinners as you are, the quarterly review is open to you. He says, I conceived the idea 5 or 6 years ago that if ever the Mosaic geology could be set down without giving offense, it would be in a historical sketch. So that was his motives. His motives of publishing his book before Darwin's was to destroy what Moses said and to try to free people from Moses. So again, that's such a telling comment, I think. All right, we'll pick up with that again next time, Lord willing. Thank you for your good comments and your good attention.